What's going on, guys? It's Kyle. Today we're going to be looking at the 9 layers of hell as described in Dante's Inferno. If you haven't heard of Dante's Inferno, you've probably heard of the 9 layers of hell, which is a huge piece of media that you can see in all kinds of other media being used, such as like separate movies or TV shows or just other books. The story itself was written in the 1300s by Dante, a Italian poet who wrote this as a part of a greater work known as the Divine Comedy, which has Inferno, Paradiso, and Purgatorio. But today I'm just going to be looking at the Inferno section, which is probably the most popular, and I'm not going to describe the actual walkthrough that Dante has in the story. I'm only going to focus on each individual layer with what the sin is that has the person at that layer, as well as the torture that that soul or that person is enduring in that layer to their respective sins. So with that being said, let's get right into it. This is going to be a little bit of a longer video. I'm going to cite all my sources for the research I did for this video in the description below. And leave a like if you enjoyed, and stick around because this is going to be a long one. The first layer of hell described in the story is Limbo. Limbo is described as being a place of without torment. It's sort of mostly just despair and sadness. As the people that are in this limbo stage in Dante's Inferno, they are described as like pagans or unbaptized children. Not necessarily evil people or very sinful people, just people that were not really following God or were unbaptized, so they're stuck here in limbo. And the main torment in limbo is just the separation from God itself, as that is terrible in itself, so their torment is not needed to be added upon because they weren't with any greater sin besides just not really following God or being unbaptized. But really, this is just described as sadness and separation from God. The second layer of hell, lust. As you can tell from the title of the second layer, this is a home to anyone that was overly lustrous or adulterous in their life on earth. In the story, there's a lot of big names that are here, but I'm not going to name all of them. I'm just going to get into the actual torture that is in the layer. The suffering endured by the souls in this layer is that of being thrown about and thrashed around by heavy winds and storms. The storm being so powerful that it's causing people to crash into each other and just hit different things. It's just a very big storm, like a level 14 hurricane that these people are in. And that is the main torture in this layer, is people being thrashed about and thrown around. But I think the main torture in this is that where the huge storm is going on, that you don't have any chance to rest. And so the entire time you're trying to fight back this storm to keep you from flying all over the place willy-nilly. You're trying to stay more grounded, and I believe that this is pretty terrifying if you think about it, because if you're, I know it don't sound as terrifying as what you would think, where it's just a big storm, sure, but if you have no means of resting and you have to constantly fight back this storm, that is very torturous in its own right. And so while being the first layer that actually involves torment in the 9 layers of hell, it is certainly not light. I would definitely still say that this is a terrible fate for all eternity, to never have rest and they're constantly fighting off a huge storm. That brings us to the third layer of hell, gluttony. This layer also consists of a really large storm, but this one is raining sleet, hail, rain, and snow, and is causing the ground to be a big mush, muddy mess that is causing everyone to get stuck into it while they try to get away from all the elements. There's also a 3-headed dog running around that will come up to you, rip you apart, and then leave you laying there in the nasty feces covered mud, cold ground, where you have to either just lay there forever, or I guess eventually heal up. I don't really know, but I know that you're going to be laying there after being ripped apart by a 3-headed dog. And there's symbolism in each one of these layers. I'm not going to get into all of it, but this one's kind of obvious, where if you were gluttonous and you ate yourself to death, you are now getting eaten to death by a 3-headed dog, while you're also being pelted by terrible precipitation coming from the hellfires. This is a pretty scary one as well. The fourth layer of hell, greed. The fourth layer of hell is known as greed and wastefulness. And obviously you can take from the name that this is people who were greedy or just not very generous in their life here on earth, so they are now forced to be in the fourth layer of hell. And this layer consists of people holding large boulders and running at each other full speed and full sprint, and kind of beating each other up in this big gnashing war. It's also said that some of them are carrying large money bags and beating people with it, sort of putting the symbolism in that they just held all their money until death, and so now they carried it in the afterlife and they're going to beat other people with it. This also goes into effect like the meaningless of their greed in the real world, and so now in the afterlife they're forced to meaninglessly fight over money that they're never going to be able to use again. I still think that this layer, in comparison to the third layer, I think the third layer would definitely be more torturous, as you have to evade a three-headed dog and you also are surviving the elements. However, though, in this one, you are also having to force to fight with large boulders and rocks. So this one's also pretty terrifying as well, but I wouldn't know which one I would rather have to deal with for eternity. But the worst part of all of these, that's a torture that's in its own right, is you have to do this for eternity with no rest. That's probably the biggest kicker of all these. The fifth layer is wrath. Wrath is being described as not as violence, because that has its own tier later, but this one is described more as people who were very like mad and angry all the time, or people that were very bitter all the time and just not very nice people. But in this layer, they're in the river Styx, and they are constantly fighting and thrashing each other to get to the main top. And if they do get to the top, the people can poke them back underwater with the sticks. And the main point is they're sort of just fighting in the water. So, like the first three, you kind of have people that are fighting, or the first, well, not really the second layer, but so far it's a lot of people fighting each other as their form of torment. And this one is sort of the same deal, except of them being in a snowy wasteland, being attacked by dogs. They are underwater or trying to get to the main top of the water, but still fighting each other. But the symbolism to this is that where they were mean and bitter in their real life, they are now forced to fight and bicker again, only this time in hell for eternity in the river Styx. Layer 6 is heresy, and this is filled with the souls of heretics. If you don't know what heresy is, it is someone who tried to get someone off the path of God by leading them down the wrong path, telling them like false things to try to stray them away from the path of righteousness. And this isn't talked about a lot today, but when this was written in the 1300s, this was a huge deal, especially to Dante the writer. And so that's why heresy is below gluttony, lust, and wrath. The torture in this layer is definitely the worst out of all of them so far. It consists of large tombs cut into rock that are being constantly stoked with flames, so they are scalding hot, and the souls of the damned that are in this layer are forced to lay down in it while constantly being stoked with more and more fire, keeping them constantly uncomfortable and constantly burning. This one is more close to how I've always heard people describe hell, besides from this story, is the lake of fire, or it's always heat, it's always fire. So this one is closer to the narrative that I've always heard hell described. Obviously, this isn't like canon to the Bible. This is a story written by Dante, but it's just where there wasn't a lot of talk about fire in the first previous ones. This one kind of pops out at you as like, oh, look, there is fire. And this one's pretty, I believe this one is definitely like the worst so far. That brings us to layer 7. I know we're kind of speed running, but the first 6 are pretty easy to get through. This is where it's going to start slowing down. Layer 7 in hell is violence, and violence is subdivided into 3 separate layers within the same layer. And the 3 layers it is described into is violence against others, violence against oneself, and then violence against God. So as there's many different types of violence and how many people can be violent in their own right, it's kind of hard to just put all of, oh, you're violent this way, I'm violent this way, we're in the same torture. But Dante didn't like that. So in this, not in the 7th layer of hell here, where we got the 3 different tiers, they all have their own different versions of torture for that respected version of violence. So the first section in the 7th layer of hell, violence against others, would strictly be for people that have committed violence against other people, such as people that are murderers or serial killers or R words. And they are put into this separate layer where they are in a vial of boiling blood, which has several torture elements besides of the ones you can think of. And they are constantly in this boiling blood where they keep trying to climb up out of it, but people will pull them back down, or demons will stoke them back underneath the boiling blood. And the torture here, besides being boiled alive in blood would also be the terrible smell that you would smell and the constant fighting and thrashing that you would be doing while in this. And that is pretty dark, but it gets worse as we go on, so just stick around. So, the second section in the seventh layer of hell, violence against oneself, would be that of or self mutilation. Self mutilation, as in you can get it, and I'll probably have to bleep the S word there, but you understand what I mean by violence against oneself. So, in this subsection of the seventh layer, the souls of the damned are in a forest, but they are the forest, meaning that they are trees pretty much. They're like trees and bushes. They're plants instead of their own bodies, and it's symbolizing that they didn't take care of their own body, so now they have to spend eternity as something that is not their body. Which by itself is terrifying enough and torturous because they can't move and they're a tree. But the main torture of this comes from harpies that come and eat fruit that grow off the bodies, and it's very painful. It is described that the limbs of the trees that are now the people are pretty much the limbs of their real body. So if a limb gets broke off of the tree, that's the equivalent of a leg getting cut off or losing some other body parts, meaning that it's very painful. And like I guess the fruit that they eat is also other body parts that the harpies are eating. So it's not like they're without torture and are just standing there. They're still getting tortured. But the added part of the torture is that they are immobile and are without their bodies. The third layer of this section, which would be violence against God, is describing people that have committed a blasphemy or sodomites, as described in Sodom and Gomorrah, and they are forced to walk on forever scalding hot sand that if they stop and lay down, they are stuck in that position for a very long time. So they can either chance it and lay down but have their entire body be burned for a very long time, or they can just deal with the pain of walking on the hot sand for all eternity. This one is scary as well. I think the worst one to me so far, as far as torture wise, would definitely be the boiling blood. I don't know what would be more painful than that as of so far. It definitely gets worse. But this one would also suck because if you're just walking around on scalding hot sand, you're obviously going to get very tired as you're like kicking your feet up trying to get away from the heat. And then if you take the chance to lay down, you don't know how long you're going to be laying there, and then your entire body is getting burned instead of just your feet. That brings us to layer 8 of the 9 layers of hell, and this one is sort of like layer 7, but with having like the subdivided places where people get tortured for like different sins. But this one, instead of having 3, has 10 different layers of different torture methods for each different like sin that the person committed. And the main overarching sin of this layer is that of fraud and deceit. So the first section in the 8th layer is that of panderers and seducers, and that pretty much boils down to people who deceive love, such as human traffickers or like sex workers at the time. And the torture in this layer is the souls of the damned must run back and forth through like this trench where demons are constantly chasing and whipping them if they go too slow. And this also brings back to the point where there's no rest and you have to constantly be doing something. So the fatigue would be unreal as well since you're running for eternity. But then if you slow down, you get whipped to death by demons and then you just come back to life and have to do it all over again. The second subsection of this 8th layer is that of boastful speakers. Pretty much saying that this layer is for people that lie and talk themselves up to seem more favorable in people's eyes to get what they want, as they are deceiving someone in order for their own personal gain. And the torture in this one is pretty rough, as it is a large pit full of feces and excrement that all the souls that are damned here have to fight in the gigantic pile of feces and excrement for all eternity. So you have the obvious smell aspect to this torture, but also you're in excrement and they're all covered in sores because of the excrement that they're fighting in and probably scratched up because of that they're fighting. Like imagine a big public like Olympic sized full pool that is like full of diarrhea that you and 50 people are jumping into and having a big brawl. And then imagine doing that for eternity. And that's pretty much this subsection. The third section in the 8th layer of hell is simonists. And simonists can be described as people who sell sacred goods. Or another example would be like say someone, if you pay me enough money, you will get to heaven. And the writer of this story, Dante, he really hated that. And so that's why he has, this specific layer for things like that. And the suffering in this layer is very, like, telling of how he feels about this situation. As the suffering in this layer is there's holes in this very scalding hot rock that people are head first into, leaving only their feet exposed to the top. But imagine that you're stuck in a cave upside down, and instead of you just slowly bleeding out, the walls get really, really hot, and you're stuck there for eternity. And it just gets worse and worse as you think about it like that. This section is for sorcerers or false prophets, such as like witches or people that practice black magic, as well as people that claim to be messengers of God that are not. And the suffering in this layer is just having their heads twisted backwards, like the Exorcist style. But that's the only suffering in this, is that they are forced to have their head switched around completely backwards for their entire eternity. And then we go on to the next layer. The next section in the eighth layer is that of corrupt politicians, or another way to think of it, how people would pay for political office instead of it being like voted in. And this one is pretty like insane. The torture is, as the last one is just people with their heads turned around. This one is a pit of boiling oil that is constantly being monitored by demons to ensure everyone is completely underneath it, and they are stuck in a pit of boiling hot oil. Boiling hot, of course it's hot, but they're stuck in a pit of boiling oil for all eternity. The sixth subsection in the eighth layer is that of hypocrites, or hypocrisy. And this one's kind of tame too, especially compared to the layer above it, as this one is just people that are constantly walking around with very heavy garments on that are like lined with like lead and gold to make it very heavy. And it doesn't really say if they're allowed to lie down or anything. It's just that they have to walk around with these heavy garments and these heavy robes. And I mean, it would be exhausting, but whenever you think of having to walk around carrying, a big heavy thing, or being in a bit of like boiling oil, I would probably prefer to just have the big heavy garments on me. But I mean, if you'd rather be in the boiling oil, that's on you. But this layer of the torture seems kind of like lackluster compared to boiling oil ahead of it. But we get farther down. The seventh subsection in the eighth layer is that of thieves or thievery. And this subsection is like it's a pit of serpents. They're not snakes, but like it's just a pit of serpents that are running around and like stinging people. And if you run and fall down onto the ground, so you have to be standing the whole time, if you fall, your entire body turns to ash, and then you like go back together, and then you can run around again and run away from the serpents. This one's like pretty weird. I don't really know what the symbolism would be besides you steal, you get hurt. So this section is that of evil counselors, or people that are leading people into death. So like there's many things you can think of for this, like dictators that lead armies into death, or like cult leaders that have people to kill themselves. They would kind of classify as an evil counselor. And the suffering in this layer is that everyone is small and they kind of look like fireflies, but that's just their soul. And the fire aspect is that they're all constantly on fire. So whenever I was always thinking of what the suffering in hell would be, whenever they say lake of fire or constant fire torture, this is kind of what I thought. And so it's pretty much exactly what you're thinking, as if your soul was constantly engulfed in flames and you're just continually burning. So this one is definitely probably the most torturous, unless you want to consider the boiling pit of oil or the boiling pit of blood worse. I would consider this one worse, because you're, instead of your physical body and soul being burnt, it's just your soul. So I'd imagine that the pain is far greater than those other two sections would be. The ninth subsection of the eighth layer is that of sowers of discord, which in today's terms pretty much means people that cause chaos or cause a ruckus. And it is said to look like, in this subsection, the aftermath of every war ever done, as it's full of body parts and bodies laying around, as like people are cut up and just torn apart everywhere. And the suffering in this layer is that of demons come to just rip everyone apart constantly. So, like, if you're ripped in half and then a bunch of other people get ripped in half again, they're just going to pile on top of everybody, and you never die because you're already dead in hell. So, this layer is just you get ripped in half, and I'm assuming you would feel the pain of being ripped in half for eternity. So, that's also just as terrible as the fire one, I would even say. I don't know. The symbolism there is just pretty cool how the chaos that they cause has them being in chaotic death, and I think that's kind of cool. And then the 10th layer in this 8th layer of hell is that of falsifiers or liars. And this pretty much consists of people that lied for personal gain or like counterfeiters. So, like, people made like fake money. And this entire section of the 8th layer is all these people are gathered in a very like dark place, and they're all sick. So, like, it's just diseases and sickness riddled throughout this entire section, like leprosy or like other diseases that I can't think of any like other 1300s diseases, but like they're all just very sick, and they're forced to be sick for all eternity. So, like, the further down some of these go, you would think that the torture gets worse and worse, but that's not always the case. Like, the sins can objectively be considered worse and worse, but like, if you think about it on different standpoints, you can fight that. But the torture, it isn't like, well, this person gets 2 fingers cut off, and then, well, this one killed 4 people, so they get 5 fingers cut off. It's not like cut in cheek, like that, or like tongue in cheek. It's sort of just however Dante was feeling whenever he was writing this. It's like, okay, that makes sense. They did this, so the best course of action for them would be this. So that brings us to the final layer in the 9 layers of hell, which is treachery or treason, and also can be described as betrayal, because there is 4 sections in this layer. It's really just 4 types of torture. I wouldn't really say sections, but there's 4, and all 4 of them are very similar because they all are based on betrayal or treasonous activity. You have betrayal against kin or family, and then you have betrayal against their country, betrayal against guests and friends, and then betrayal against God is the worst. And the 4 subsections or the 4 tortures that you're going to find in this 9th layer of hell is the first one, where it's betrayal of family. It's people that are frozen all the way up to their neck in solid ice, so they're unable to move, but they're still able to like talk. And I don't think they can move their head, but they're still able to talk. And they're constantly crying, so like there's always ice building up around their face, and so you're stuck in this frozen prison for eternity because you betrayed your family. And then the betrayal of your country, you're frozen a little bit higher up, so now you can't move your neck, you're up to your neck. And this one is the same deal as the betrayal against family, just this time you're up to your neck and you're probably not going to be able to talk now. Then third, you have the betrayal of guests and friends. And the reason this is above the other 2 is because uh, like, you have to make friends, and then betraying their trust is worse than betraying family, which you're born into. And this one, they're just frozen even higher up to the point where they're definitely not talking and they definitely can't see. They're pretty much almost covered at this point, leaving probably just their faces exposed as described. And then finally, you have betrayal against God, where they are frozen completely. There's no part of them showing, and they're completely under the ice, as described in the story, as Dante can see them under his feet as he's walking. So this is where we get to the deepest point of the 9 layers of hell, which is the absolute middle of the frozen lake, as I've described as the 9th layer. And this is where we find the 4 most tortured people in hell. And the 4 that we're going to find here is Lucifer, Cassius, Brutus, and Judas. And so what's happening here is Lucifer is at the deepest point, and he's described as mountainous in size, as he is so big that like giants look like ants to him. That's how big he is. And on Lucifer, you have 3 faces, or 2 faces and then one that's considered a face. The 2 faces that are on Lucifer are on the sides of his head, which is Cassius and Brutus. And Cassius and Brutus are the 2 people in ancient Rome who conspired to kill Caesar. And so they are in the last layer of hell, attached to Lucifer, as they are constantly being scratched at by Lucifer and chewed on for all of eternity. And then you have Judas, who is in the mouth of Lucifer, the most tortured person in hell. If you know Bible stories, you know who Judas is. He's the disciple who betrayed Jesus for silver, and that has him as the deepest layer of hell, so far removed from God. What Judas is doing is he is inside the mouth of Lucifer, constantly being chewed on for all of eternity. And then finally, Lucifer himself, as a huge act of betrayal and treachery against God, as the story of the fallen angel obviously being Lucifer. So he is in the bottom of hell, in the lowest pit, in the coldest area, as like a symbolism that he is the farthest away from the warmth of God, along with, his three others that are with him there. And it only gets colder and colder for everyone else around, as the mountainous wings of Lucifer constantly are batting, sending chilling winds all the way through the frozen lake, and just adding to the absolute torture and freezing cold that is in this layer. A final thing to be described about Lucifer and the three others that are attached to him in this final pit of hell is that they are all crying blood that is seeping together and making sort of like a river that is going over the frozen lake. So that is the 9 layers of hell in Dante's Inferno. There's obviously a story that goes along with it, as Dante's walking through with another poet that he really likes named Virgil. And the story is very interesting too, because it has a lot more symbolism and it has a lot more like plot development. And there's like, he names a bunch of characters that you may have heard of that are in these specific like layers of hell. But I didn't want to get into all of that because there's already multiple videos describing that. I just wanted to describe the 9 layers of hell and the sins that will get you to each layer and what the suffering is in each one of those layers. So that about does it for today's video. Let me know if you enjoyed this. I definitely enjoyed the research of it. I think it's fascinating. Nothing that I've said today or relayed to you is part of the Christian belief. This was just a poet in the 1300s who was writing a story about the 9 layers of hell as he's seen it. This has nothing to do with how the Bible says it. So anything that you thought is like, wow, that's pretty insane that this would be here in the Bible. This is not like canon to the Bible. This is not Jesus. This is not God's words. This is a poet, and this is a completely fiction story. So anything that you thought was too far in this layers of hell for a sin that is there, I mean, I probably would agree with you. And don't take it as this is what the Christians believe. This is just a fiction story written by a Italian Catholic in the 1300s. And I believe that's going to do it for this video. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. I really appreciate it. And have a good one.